At the same time, Daguerre was introducing his invention in Paris. William Henry Fox Talbot was also unveiling his invention in England. The large distinction between his process and Daguerre's was that he made paper negatives, which he could then make as many prints as he wanted. So his process was completely reproducible, which allowed him to make portfolios. And his earliest work was primarily of his estate in England, in the countryside, called Laycock Abbey. And he would occasionally include people in his pictures, perhaps for scale, perhaps just as social evidence. But these images have a very kind of leisurely quality to them. His invention was taken up by other photographers, as was Daguerre's. This is David Octavius Hill and Robert Adamson, Scottish photographers, photographing a churchyard in Edinburgh, Scotland. I like this image for the wall in the foreground, but I also like the reverse image, showing it from another angle entirely. Like it particularly for its very graphic quality. Francis Frith and a number of other photographers began traveling the world with their cameras and bringing back evidence, primarily to Europe and to the United States, to show what people had only heard about or had seen had seen paintings or drawings of or read about. Actual evidence of them began to come back to Europe and the United States. In this image, Frith understood that the scale of these structures would not be understandable except by including recognizable objects, in this case people and animals. So in the foreground, relative foreground, he has a couple of people, and beyond them there is another person sitting next to a horse. And way off in the distance, but well before you get to the pyramids, there are other figures. It's kind of hard to tell in this reproduction, for which I apologize, but there are more people and horses, and then go a lot further and you get to the pyramids. So it's understandable to people looking at these images how large these structures are. What Frith would do is create portfolios, which he would print in very large numbers and sell. He made himself quite wealthy doing this. We had talked earlier about the vignette in architectural photography, and even the earliest photographers understood the importance of showing details and of changing up their point of view so that the viewer wouldn't get bored. It's much more interesting to shift point of view in order to maintain interest. And also photographing under different lighting conditions. And invariably in these early photographs you do find people, again for scale. This is Bisson Frere, the Bisson brothers, who were also early travel photographers, among other things. This is by Roger Fenton of the Kremlin. Roger Fenton had made a name for himself by being the first war photographer, although his war photographs are mostly of empty battlefields after the fact. There were other photographers who went to the Far East, to Asia, also to document how people in other parts of the world lived. Samuel Bourne is another of those photographers. Félix Nadar was an early celebrity photographer in Paris, photographed most of the notable people at the time. And he was also interested, though, in his environment, and in this case, the famous sewers of Paris. This is by Edward Baldus, who was an early commercial photographer who photographed quite a bit of architecture. And he was working at a time when the processing of images was becoming much easier for a variety of reasons. And as a result, he could be more prolific than a lot of his predecessors. But a very good architectural photographer. And his the emulsions and the tools at his disposal allowed him to photograph in considerable detail as well. The resolution was very high, so we're able to move in and look at small portions of much larger images and still see plenty of detail. This is by Charles Marville, who's a French photographer who documented Paris, parts of Paris, many of which are were destroyed not too much later and replaced with this what was considered more modern architecture. This is the Louvre by Gustav Logre, and I think particularly nice for the shadows cast by the building on itself. But very different from another view taken by the Bisson brothers around the same time. The frame is now vertical, and the composition is much tighter, taken from a higher angle, and there's a greater sense, to me anyway, of monumentality in this view than was true of the Logre image. It was also taken at a different time of day, and just is more dramatic overall. This is by Frederick Evans, who was a British photographer who specialized in photographing cathedrals and churches. This is referred to as the Sea of Steps for obvious reasons, and I think is a quite extraordinary picture. He also specialized in making platinum prints, which were very dangerous to make. The lab technicians who did this kind of work tended not to live very long because the chemicals they were using were highly toxic. But they do yield these incredible prints. This is another Frederick Evans. And another, again, a very monumental, powerful image.